And what experience, besides the articles that you've written, have you had practical experience with those topics, including the design and construction of landfills?
Virtually my whole career has been in consulting engineering business. Those 43 years specialized in waste management. That have included fish ponds, lagoons, landfills of all types. And so I have been exposed to virtually all of the landfill types that we would conventionally run into. They do run the gamut from municipal, hazardous, rubble, mining, variety of industrial facilities, as well as the liquid phase that are in sludges and similar type of materials.
And what, as a civil engineer and a geotechnical engineer working in landfills, what goes into landfill design? Can you generally describe what that process entails?
A current sanitary landfill is a fairly complex design process. Many years ago, the landfills were actually called dumps because that's exactly what they were. They were essentially disposing into the ground. Today, there are regulations at the federal level generated under Resource Conservation and Recovery Act of 1976 that set the baseline for managing solid waste in general terms. The states then have the authority to set those standards and administrative procedures for all activities in their particular state. So they set the federal and state standards minimum technical requirements. The technical requirements are generally very similar across all state boundaries based upon the minimum federal levels. They require not only the protection of the environment and public health, but also specific technical components that go into the design. There are two basic, for a municipal solid waste landfill, there are two basic byproducts. They end up being the leachate or the liquid phase and the gaseous phase that are generated during the decomposition of the waste. So there are systems that are required for those management of those byproducts as a minimum standard in the landfill regulations that are established at the federal level. Also, they establish boundary conditions for landfills so that releases do not occur to the environment. And the environment may be the groundwater, surface water, air, any of the other resources that we normally consider to be a natural resource.
And so, as someone involved in the design and construction of landfills, have you had a role in designing each of those different components?
Yes, throughout my career, I have done the calculations, the designs, the drawings, all of those components. As I've progressed up, I've managed those components, and today I'm still involved in actually directing and overseeing landfill design work.
And have you also then had a role in the construction phase of landfills?
Yes.
And what has that work been?
Landfill construction is very critical. A design that is well thought out and well performed can potentially not perform up to its standard depending upon the construction procedures that are used. So quality assurance during the construction phase is absolutely critical. A landfill, in effect, can be considered a very long-term construction project because there are elements of that construction that occur for the life of the landfill. And in fact, ultimately, a landfill is closed out in accordance with its permit requirements and a closure plan, and those designs must also be protective of the environment. So the quality assurance is necessary from the beginning construction all the way through the final closure of the facility. That is part of the CQA, we call it, for the facility, and we've been involved, or I've been involved in all of those various phases.
Now, on your CV, on page 4, there are, starting on page 4, you identify some landfill projects, and it looks like it goes from the left-hand column of page 4 back to page 7, specifically as it relates to landfills. Is that accurate?
That is accurate, yes.
And is that an exhaustive list of the landfill projects that you've worked on, or is that a sample?
No, that is a sampling, and this is intended to be a summary. This is obviously to summarize my experience over an extended period of time, and the list, if I were to ever generate one, would be pretty exhaustive.
I see on a number of these bullet items related to projects that you've worked on, there's a title that says Project Director. What does that mean?
Generally, a project director, it can mean a lot of different things depending upon definitions, but it's normally the most senior individual on that particular project. Usually works very closely with the client, setting the goals, standards, the expectations for the project, and is generally involved in conceptualization of the project. That individual is very often involved in the quality assurance and quality control of the work products as they're developed, and guiding all that work as it's generated. And in most cases, particularly in my case, that is the engineer of record that actually stamps and seals the drawings that will be used for construction or closure or permitting, whatever purpose is intended by the project.
So what does it mean to be the engineer of record?
It means you're a professional engineer that has put his personal stamp and seal on all the drawings, and is certifying that the work does meet the engineering requirements established in that particular state.
And have you worked in a variety of states? Can you list some of the states you've worked in?
I guess I can list a few. I've probably worked in 2/3 of the states in the United States, and probably half a dozen or more throughout countries throughout the world, doing very similar type of projects. On the East Coast, I guess I'm going to start with Maine, Massachusetts, New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland, Delaware, West Virginia, Ohio. Not sure how far you want me to go west.
That's a good thing. At the beginning of your CV, you identify professional registrations. Are you a professional engineer currently in Pennsylvania?
I am.
And how long have you held that certification?
My original engineering training certification was in 1970. My initial PE license, professional engineering license, was in Maryland in 1976, and my license in Pennsylvania was thereafter, probably 1977, maybe 1978.
And are there requirements for continuing education or ongoing work in the field to keep up your certification?
There are. Every 2 years, a new license must be issued, and there are requirements for professional development hours to be certified and submitted to the state board for their review before the license is renewed.
And under fields of competency at the beginning, you identify conceptual and final design. What's the difference between the two?
Conceptual applies to virtually any type of project where you're deciding what the goal of the project will be and deciding what the concept that you would like to carry forth would be. It would be the size of the box, if you will, and what is the purpose of the box that you're going to be designing. The final design is when you actually establish all the requirements, the technical specifications, the drawings, the dimensions for that box that you then are designing. And the same thing goes with the landfill. Conceptualization is conceptually going through deciding what the facility should look like within the bounds that are allowed by regulation and the client's wishes, and then carrying it forth in final design, which is developing plan specifications for construction purposes, and thereafter for implementing.
And as part of your work, have you participated in the permitting process itself?
Yes.
And what's your involvement been in the permitting process?
The permitting of a landfill is an exhaustive procedure. It often takes many years because there are very significant design standards that are established. There is a lot of requirements. Every state is slightly different, but they all have to meet minimum federal standard. But the administrative procedures in each state are slightly different. They generally follow very similar patterns. First of all, there is a siting assessment of the location for that landfill. They then carry it into an investigation, geologic investigation, subsurface, groundwater, looking at the baseline for that facility as a next step in that process. And finally, there is a permit document and documentation consisting of essentially a preliminary design. And that design can be quite extensive. There's all the calculations are submitted with the permit application, and these are very significant documents for the regulators and the public to be able to review and decide whether that landfill should be permitted or not.
And have you in the course of your work overseen then that permit application process on behalf of landfill operators?
Yes.
And during the course of that work and during the course of your other work, do you regularly supervise people under you, other technicians, other engineers?
Yes, yes. It's a very large effort, so it's normally a team. There are a team of experts in a variety of different engineering disciplines, but in my current position as project director, I would oversee and approve all of the various teams.
And as part of that, have you been, as part of the permitting process, have you been involved in the submittal of called line of sight studies?
Yes.
And what has your involvement been in that process? And how does that fit into the permitting process?
Landfills are generally a very controversial project, and often there are technical issues that need to be addressed, and there are a lot of scientific and engineering bases for making decisions when you design a landfill. But nuisance factors are ones that often are ones that need to be addressed in addition to just the simple, straightforward design of the facility. Nuisance factors for a landfill can be anything from traffic, visibility, noise, odors, a whole host of different items that can affect the community at large. And those generally, depending upon the state, again, will be to a greater or lesser extent addressed in the permit application. Visibility or aesthetics is one of those nuisance factors that is often looked at.
And so what has your then involvement been as part of the process of submitting those types of studies?
We would normally have a planner that is experienced in that activity, perform a viewshed analysis and a line of sight analysis to assure ourselves of what conditions were actually currently present, so that if during the design phase mitigation was required, we could certainly put in place some sort of mitigation factors to offset any concerns that may arise.
And have you overseen that process?
Yes.
When those materials get submitted for a project and you're in charge of the project, are you ultimately signing off on them?
Yes.
You've been talking about the permitting process. Have you been involved in the permitting process as it relates to different phases of a landfill? So from the initial permitting through expansions or other permit modifications?
A lot of landfills are designed, first of all, designed phases. Very often, a lot of those phases are laid out in the initial design, so there's not necessarily going to be an expansion beyond that point. But a lot of earlier landfills were smaller, so expansions do occur as time goes on. Those expansions can be lateral, they can be vertical, all depending upon whether they are allowed by the regulations at the time.
And as part of your involvement both in the permitting process and in design and construction, have you had experience identifying potential risks associated with upward expansion of landfills?
You consider the same factors in a vertical and lateral expansion as you would any new landfill design. They have the same considerations, the same drivers, the same performance requirements. It's just in a larger, different configuration.
At this time, I'd like to offer Mr. Hosmer, I'm sorry, have you testified as an expert before?
I have
And can you estimate how many times?
5 to 10.
And in what, have you testified in different jurisdictions?
Yes.
What types of jurisdictions have you testified?
Federal and state courts primarily.
Have you ever had your qualifications as an expert rejected by a court or body?
No.
At this time, we would offer Mr. Hosmer as an expert in civil, geotechnical, and landfill engineering.
Like some questions? Thank you. So Hosmer, you mentioned at the beginning a company or firm name. What was that name?
Environmental Resources Management.
And what is that entity?
It's a consulting engineering firm.
And where is it located? Is that identified anywhere on the Exhibit A8 on your CD?
Probably is not. It is, I am located in the Annapolis, Maryland office. It is a international firm, 5,400 people. Base is London, England, and base in the U.S. is Philadelphia.
What position do you hold?
I'm a senior consultant and partner.
What's the actual address of the firm?
The address of my office,
Well, let's start with your office and then the address of the firm, headquarters of the firm.
the address for my office is Suite 400, 200, Harry S. Truman Parkway, Annapolis, Maryland, 21401. 01.
And in Annapolis, Maryland, does your offices have show the name Environmental Resources Management?
Yes,
And where's the main office of Environmental Resources Management?
the corporate office headquarters, if you will, is London, and I do not have a street address.
You don't know the street address of the
No.
headquarters?
No.
Why isn't it mentioned on your CV, Exhibit A8?
I do not know.
You don't know?
It's not mentioned on any CDs that we use.
What type of business entity is it?
It's a partnership.
Who's the president of Environmental Resources Management?
The chief executive officer is John Alexander,
And where is he located?
London.
How many people are at the office in Annapolis, Maryland?
Approximately 60.
And are they all employees or of Environmental Resources Management?
Yes.
Where in Pennsylvania have you testified as an expert?
Western Pennsylvania, Mercer County.
Mercer County?
Yes.
And when was that?
It was about 2 years ago, year and a half ago.
And before what board or entity did you testify?
That was a zoning board. It was a combined hearing for Pine
Pine Township or Springfield Township?
There were two,
One hearing or different hearings?
same hearing. One.
What was the nature of the application before the zoning board in Pine Township or Springfield Township?
There was a determination on whether the height of a landfill could exceed the current zoning requirements.
What was the landfill?
It was a proposed landfill to be built over a old closed landfill.
Did it have a name?
Tri County,
That's the landfill that resulted in the Commonwealth Court decision? Do you know?
I don't know of which decision you're referring to.
Was the landfill ever built?
It has not been.
And for whom did you testify?
For the, our client, is that who you're referring to?
Who was your client?
It was Simon Properties.
Simon Properties?
Simon Properties,
The shopping center? thing?
yes.
And what was their status of the application? What side of it were they on?
They were appealing the application.
They were an objector?
Yes,
What year do you think that was?
2 years ago.
2013?
Yes.
Testing my math. When else have you testified in, and when you qualified as an expert before that zoning hearing board?
Yes.
When else have you testified in Pennsylvania?
I don't recall whether I have or not. I don't recall anything.
Is your license in Pennsylvania good standing today?
Yes.
Can you tell us, if we did a right to know request for a Department of Environmental Protection, for what landfill would we find your name on a permit application
In Pennsylvania?
in Pennsylvania?
Probably not.
And the same question if we were to request DEP records in Pennsylvania, for what landfill would we find that you did a shed study,
None.
line of sight study?
No.
When was the last time you actually looked at DEP regulations for landfills in Pennsylvania?
Probably 2 years ago.
And what was that for?
That was before the case, the Tri-County case.
Did you look at any DEP records relating to the Keystone Sanitary landfill?
Objection, I guess beyond the scope of voir dire for expert qualifications.
Test of his credentials and his right to testify in this matter.
We should answer the question.
The question, what was the question,
sanitary landfill a permitted landfill in Pennsylvania?
To my knowledge, yes.
Does, do you know, since you, last time when you testified, you looked at the regulations 2 years ago, does DEP, with regard to landfills, look at traffic issues,
They do,
visibility,
they do,
noise,
they do,
odors?
yes.
You mentioned mitigation factors. Explain that. What cite some mitigation factors, if you would?
For what purpose?
Well, you mentioned, you talked about nuisance factors, and you talked about mitigation factors. That was your term. What did you mean by that?
I think we're talking about visibility, and mitigation factors can be anything that would obstruct or change view. That could be berms, trees, change topography on the facility, something to mitigate the direct views.
Have a second. I have no further questions. We object to his testimony as an expert. We don't think by his own testimony he has the qualifications directly related enough to Pennsylvania permitting and design to be of relevance or to be competent with regard to the expansion of an existing permitted landfill in Pennsylvania.
Objection noted. We'll move on. I'm in the position I have right now. I think I'd rather have any of the board members have any questions from this witness. I have a question. 35, 40 years you've been in the business. You noted you've only testified once in Pennsylvania on a landfill. How many other landfills, as you or your firm, taken care of in North America, United States? Approximately.
I've been involved in several hundred landfill projects in my career.
Okay.
We do not, as a firm, generally market, if you will, litigation and adversarial proceedings. So that aspect of my experience is limited.
Now, you testified that you were involved in the permit process too.
Correct.
I think a big concern with the crowd here is over the 50-year expansion. Is that out of the norm, considering the size? Or is it within the realm of all other landfills that you've?
I'm not sure I understand the question very well, sir, but
Well, what I'm trying to get at is, I understand there's a closure time with landfills. Is that included in the expansion time? These are things that I think a lot of people might not know. I don't know if it takes 10 years to close a landfill. I don't know if it takes a year to close a landfill. If that's included in the application for Keystone, I think a lot of people would like to know if it's taking garbage for 25 or 30 years, and then 20 years of taking time to close it. Is that what's included in this? Is that out of the norm, is what I'm trying to get at?
I did not review the permit application for Keystone, so I can't comment on the Keystone application. I can say in general, a facility is designed and permitted with a closure plan in mind. That closure plan can change and operator will close portions that reach its final configuration as the landfill proceeds. So it is not a process where the facility operates for a given, its expected period of time, let's just say 10 years,
Okay.
and then it takes another 10 years to close. The closure, the final closure period will be relatively short for the operating area that's still remaining when that landfill finally takes the last load into it. The final closure, which is generally another layer above, including the cap system and any additional gas management systems and things like that, will be constructed as a construction project, depending on the size. It may take 1 year to say maybe 3 years, but it's a relatively short period of time, depending on how large